This is Bloomberg Businessweek Daily, reporting from the magazine that helps global leaders stay ahead, with insight on the people, companies, and trends shaping today's complex economy, plus global business, finance, and tech news as it happens. Bloomberg Businessweek Daily with Carol Massar and Tim Stenovec, live on Bloomberg Radio, television, YouTube, and Bloomberg Originals.
And a very good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to Tuesday afternoon. It is March 24th, 2026. Carol Massar, Tim Stenovec, live here at Bloomberg headquarters in New York City. You just mentioned some headlines.
Yeah, Axios reporting that the U.S. claims Iran had agreed to many of its plans. The U.S. shared with Israel its 15-point plan to end the war, according to Axios. The publication citing two sources with knowledge of potential U.S.-Iran talks. Essentially, the U.S., according to Axios, is waiting for a response from Iran on possible talks. The headline, though, Carol.
Yeah.
The U.S. and Iran may hold high-level talks as soon as Thursday. That, according to Axios.
All right, we have that going on, but we also have Saudi Arabia, the UAE, losing patience with Iran, joining in on this U.S. and Israeli war with Iran. So we also have the Journal reporting about U.S. planning to send airborne soldiers to the Middle East. It's really a lot of headlines coming at us and trying to make sense of what is going on. In the meantime, we've got a market bouncing around. We're down a little bit on the S&P, down about 0.6% on the NASDAQ 100. But we have seen certainly energy markets move up again.
Yeah, Brent crude up above $104 a barrel. WTI up to $91 a barrel. Both of those up by more than 3.6%. Brent up close to 5%.
All right, so I kind of gave it away. Ahead this hour, we're going to get into who is now joining in on the U.S.-Israeli war in Iran. And, whether or not this could be the beginning of a new era when it comes to the Middle East. But we're going to dig into that in just a moment.
Well, on that, too, and on the war, a timely interview from our Bloomberg technology team, our BTech team, with the physical AI company Applied Intuition.
Yeah, interesting stuff that they're working on, and working with certainly defense areas. Plus, a big picture view from a member of President Trump's cabinet during his first term in the White House. He's also a longtime distressed investor. Wilbur will join us, very well known to the Bloomberg audience.
And investors, the private credit storm that is lashing the father-son duo at the helm of Cliffwater. A check on private credit, or at least part of private credit, in just a few minutes.
Yeah, there's still so many stories and concerns there. All right, we're going to get to it all. Busy 60 minutes coming your way. First up, though, a check on the trading session. Here is Amy Morris in for Charlie Kelly.
Thank you, Carol. They're calling it the Tehran toll booth. Iran allowing vessels to pass through the Strait of Hormuz if they pay up to $2 million. Sources tell Bloomberg the payments have been handled quietly. The lack of transparency and uncertainty over who might be targeted is adding a fresh layer of friction to the shipping lane. Stocks fluctuated and oil rose as traders grapple with a range of possible outcomes for the war in the Middle East. President Trump claiming talks are underway to end the conflict. We do check markets for you all day long here at Bloomberg. WTI near $92 per barrel. Brent crude now topping $103 per barrel. S&P 500 is down 0.2%. NASDAQ down about 0.75%. The Dow little changed on the upside. 10-year Treasury yield at 4.4% and the 2-year yield at 3.92%. Bitcoin is about 2.5% lower, around $69,000. Ares Management and Apollo Global Management limited withdrawals from their funds to 5% of shares after clients sought to redeem a larger percentage. It suggests investors may be getting anxious about a liquidity squeeze in the private credit market. Limiting redemptions would increase negative sentiment and constrain liquidity further for the fund. That would make it harder to underwrite new loans. ARM Holdings will begin selling its own chips called AGI CPUs for the first time, aiming to claim a bigger piece of the massive spending on AI gear. AGI CPU will have as many as 136 cores and draw 300 watts of electricity and will be produced by TSMC. Meta Platforms will be its first major customer. ARM shares now more than 1.5% higher. For on-demand news 24 hours a day, subscribe to Bloomberg News Now wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Amy Morris. That's a Bloomberg Business Flash. We go back now to Bloomberg Businessweek Daily with Carol Massar and Tim Stenovec.
Amy Morris, we need to get you a cup of hot tea or some chicken soup there because you certainly sound like you're fighting a cold. I feel like everybody is fighting something
I got
right
my
now.
own stash of cough drops today, Carol.
You did. I saw you swiping some last night after our show. No, it's kind of our world that we are living in. There are so many conflicting headlines coming at us. I'm just taking a look at our live blog when it comes to the U.S. and Israeli war in Iran. What are the latest headlines that we are focusing on? You mentioned Axios reporting potential talks between the U.S. and Iran, that they may hold some high-level talks as soon as Thursday. U.S. waiting for response from Iran on those possible talks. And the U.S. claims Iran had agreed to many of its plans, Axios citing two sources with knowledge on the potential of these talks. So I don't know. This is something that I feel like we've been floating around, certainly yesterday again. We're just trying to figure it out.
Yeah, I mean, it runs counter to what we've heard from several Iranian officials who've pushed back on the idea that there is any sort of negotiating going on. It follows a report that we got earlier today, too, from the Wall Street Journal that the Pentagon is planning to deploy a brigade combat team from the Army's elite 82nd Airborne Division to the Middle East to support operations against Iran. This, according to the Wall Street Journal, citing two officials. A written order to deploy the unit, Carol, made up of roughly 3,000 soldiers, is expected in the coming hours, the official said. The decision, though, to put boots on the ground in Iran hasn't been made yet, according to the officials.
Yeah, and I think what's interesting, one of the things you and I were just talking before we came on air, Iran setting a transit fee of as much as $2 million per trip through the Strait of Hormuz. So basically setting up a bit of a toll there and just wondering how much oil, but it is a lot of oil that these tankers, carry. We think about any of these ships that go through these major straits or ports, if you will. I think about the Panama Canal. I've been down there seeing lots of things, but this is what they're doing, I guess. It's just kind of part of our macro setup. The other thing we also want to get to, and it's one of our most read stories on the Bloomberg today, on the U.S. war in Iran. Iran's biggest Gulf Arab neighbors considering joining the U.S.-Israeli war against Iran could be pushed to if Tehran attacks their critical infrastructure. And this is according to several people with knowledge of the situation. So this is kind of where we are.
Well, with a view and an understanding on what's happening in the region, we welcome back Takeyh, Senior Fellow for Middle East Studies at the Council on Foreign Relations. He's the author of several books, including most recently The Last Shah, America, Iran, and the Fall of the Pahlavi Dynasty, and Guardians of the Revolution, Iran and the World in the Age of the Ayatollahs. He joins us from Washington. Ray, always good to check in with you. We just want to start with the back and forth. What Axios is reporting, the idea of Iran agreeing to some sort of multi-pronged plan to end the war, the pushback that we got earlier this week, the comments from the president that sent markets soaring yesterday. What's your view on the end of this conflict?
Well, on the American side, the president may be looking for an off-ramp with everything that has happened in the markets and so on. However, with President Trump, there's always a large number of options that he can consider. There's a lot of military deployments taking place in the region. And so what we have seen in previous rounds of negotiations in June and in March, in February, they were usually preludes to war. So this may be another one that what the president is saying about discussions doesn't meet the manpower that he's deploying, but he may be looking for an off-ramp from a war that is proving more complex than he thought. I suspect the Iranians, despite their narrative of success and triumph, are also looking for a way out of this. They have suffered a great deal, and they may be essentially trying to figure out how to extricate themselves from this conflict as well. So we'll see if this mediation is real, and we see if it can produce some sort of a agreement not to settle the conflict between the two nations, but at least some sort of an armistice for now that allows everybody to return to their corners.
All right, so let's throw on top of that, Ray, one of our stories, it is our most read on the Bloomberg, or one of our most read, about Iran's most powerful or biggest Gulf Arab neighbors, Iran's biggest Gulf Arab neighbors, considering joining the U.S.-Israeli war. I'm trying to understand that, and help me out here in your understanding or thinking and your knowledge of this region. Did the region know? Did Saudi Arabia know that Donald Trump was going to do this, was willing to go along, and maybe this is part of a bigger strategy, a plan? Or are they just looking at it and saying, wait, this could actually be an opportunity for us to change the direction of the Middle East going forward? I'm just trying to understand the steps here. Or is it all just kind of happening in real time with no big strategy?
I suspect the latter. I'm not quite sure if this is a very synchronized, thought-out plan. And in terms of the Gulf states, before the war, they were essentially having a policy of détente with Iran. and actually pressuring the administration not to engage in the conflict, because the Iranians were quite clear about what they would do should there be an attack on them. They said they would regionalize the war, and they would also target energy supplies as well as the passage to the Gulf of Hormuz, to the Persian Gulf. So there was nothing surprising about what the Iranians did. There are some reports that the Gulf states are becoming more aggressive, but honestly, I suspect at the end of this war, whatever it is, they will return to their practice of trying to balance the two sides, having a relationship with the United States as close, but also not necessarily being antagonistic to their neighbor in the north, which would be aggrieved, injured, and quite angered.
Well, the implication of what you just said, Ray, is that we don't see a very changed Iran following the end of this conflict.
Oh, no, Iran will certainly change after this conflict. The Islamic Republic that survives this war is going to be very different than the one that went in before. For one thing, a large number of highly senior officials have been decapitated. And one of the things that has happened with this large-scale decapitation is you're beginning to finally see a generational shift where you begin to see a new group of people gradually coming to power. In terms of the military services, the Revolutionary Guards and others, you begin to see the second-tier officials coming to power. And for them, their formative experience was not the 1979 revolution. They were too young for that. It wasn't even Iran-Iraq war. They may have participated in this latter stages. For a lot of them, their most formative experience was the Syrian civil war. A large number of the Iranian military officials rotated through that Syrian civil war. About 1,000 died. And the lesson they drawn from the Syrian conflict, that what was built for a long period of time collapsed in a matter of 3 weeks. So they're likely to be more vicious in protection of their patrimony at home. The Islamic Republic that comes out of this war, should it survive, which I suspect it will, is likely to be more militant, but also more brittle, in a sense that the elite that's coming to power are less competent in statecraft and management and so forth than the ones that was decapitated. Not that the ones that were killed were exactly managers of competence and so forth. So Islamic Republic is going to be very different going forward. Its entire strategic doctrine may change. The value of nuclear weapons has never been greater for this regime, with everything that has happened. No, we're going to come out of this with a very different regime whose ramifications will unfold over time.
Well, so a different regime that comes out. But if I heard you correctly, that nuclear power is still very important and maybe more important than ever before. Is that
more important than ever? Yes, absolutely. And it was actually one of the tensions between the late Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei and some within the security services. The perception was that the Israelis, after October 7th, Prime Minister Netanyahu certainly said that the rules of the game have changed. And he certainly has proven that. Israel became much more preemptive in dismantling strikes and dealing with threats before they metastasize. And there were a lot of voices within the security services in Iran that were saying, if the Israelis change the rules of the game, we should do so as well and actually cross the nuclear threshold. And they were very public about that.
Yeah. Hey.
And for whatever set of reasons, Ali Khamenei didn't do it. As a result, he lost his nuclear program in June and his life in February.
20 seconds. I just got to ask you, does the U.S. have a bigger enemy now in Iran, or it's a better relationship going forward? Very quickly, if you could.
It has a more radicalized enemy, but in terms of its intent, but at least for now, weaker in terms of its capabilities.
Okay. Always appreciate your insight. Ray Takeyh, he is Senior Fellow for Middle East Studies at the Council on Foreign Relations, of course, understands this region, former at the State Department. And so that's really the latest on the war in Iran, but we continue to track some of the headlines because they continue to come.
I also want to bring on former U.S. Secretary of Commerce Wilbur Ross. He's well known to the Bloomberg audience and to Wall Street, a longtime distressed investor. He has restructured over $400 billion of assets, everything ranging, Carol, from airline apparel to auto parts, home building insurance, marine transport, oil, gas, shipyard, steel, textile, trucking industries, and more.
Yeah, certainly understands the global market and certainly geopolitics and more, and politics here in the U.S. Wilbur, so good to have you. He is Chairman, President, and CEO of Ross Acquisition Corporation. He joins us from Florida. Great to have you back on Bloomberg and to be talking with you again. Big picture, you told our Scarlet Fu, Wilbur, the action in Iran is long overdue. You're not alone in that thinking. We've heard other people on Bloomberg say that. You also believe that this war is temporary in nature, even if we don't exactly know when it ends. What do you believe is the long-term impact of this war when it comes to geopolitics, when it comes to global markets? How do you think about it?
I think this war will make less likely armed conflict elsewhere, because people have now seen that, at least under President Trump, U.S. is willing to use its enormous military wealth and strength to deal with threats. That was not at all clear under the Biden administration, nor under the Obama. So I think part of the reason so much trouble boiled up was that they viewed us as a paper tiger. But with what happened in Venezuela, what's happening now in Iran, and what's probably going to happen very quickly in Cuba, I think people have seen the sleeping dragon is no longer sleeping. Sleeping dragon is perfectly ready to put its fangs wherever they're needed. So I think the old saying holds true. The best way to avoid a war is if everybody knows you're fully prepared, not only to pursue it, but to win it.
You mentioned Venezuela, you mentioned Cuba, you mentioned Iran. At this point, Secretary, who else has been put on notice?
Well, everybody's been put on notice. I think ultimately China and Russia are on notice. Well, we haven't done much about invading Russia and probably won't initiate anything like that. We have provided support of one kind or another to Ukraine, and we certainly have been arming Taiwan, and even more importantly, we've been moving a lot of the semiconductor technology from Taiwan to the United States. So we're becoming both less vulnerable in the event something happens on Taiwan, and yet also showing that we're very interested in it.
You know, I find it interesting, Wilbur, that you went to Russia. And I just think, you know, and maybe you can give some insight into President Trump, because I think there are things that are said that seem to indicate a friendship, a camaraderie with a certain leader, be it President Putin. And yet it sounds like from what you said that Russia needs to be kind of on guard when it comes to the United States. Help us understand President Trump and who he sees as true allies and who he sees as foes.
Well, in terms of Russia, my point is a very simple one. Russia has had a terrible struggle with Ukraine, a much smaller, much weaker country. And in fact, lately, the last report I've seen, the Ukrainians regained 125 square miles of territory that Russia had previously occupied there. So clearly the Russian war, after all these years, all these vast numbers of deaths, all this destruction, both to Russia and Ukraine, they haven't really gotten as far as they thought. I think if Russia had had any idea that the Ukrainian war would go the way it has, I don't think they would have gone in. They thought it would be an easy cakewalk, and they were wrong. Now roll that forward.
Well, is that the same with how you see maybe the U.S. approach on Iran? Forgive me for interrupting, but I think there was a thinking that this was going to be a lot easier. Do you agree?
No, I don't think so.
Okay.
I think, in fact, it has gone better than any expectation we could have had. Who would have thought that within the first couple of weeks, we would get total air superiority. Who would have thought we could have knocked out 100 and some odd vessels, virtually the whole series of vessels that Iran has? Who would have thought we could have done as much damage to the missile site and to the nuclear facilities as we have? So I think the war has gone much more rapidly than we could have thought. And I think the most remarkable and fortunate part is that there have been so few American casualties in the war. Now, even one casualty is a horrible thing, and I would have felt a heck of a lot better without it. But when you consider everything, it's been very, very small. My big fear had been American soldiers coming home in body bags week after week after week. I think that would have caused a lot of unrest within our population. But the other big strategic message, we knocked out their air defense mechanism pretty quickly. Iran is essentially defenseless against our attack. And if you roll back to Venezuela, they knocked that out within a few minutes. And guess whose defense system that was? That was the Russian defense system. So you asked, why would Russia give second thoughts? I think they would give second thoughts because they've just seen what it means to have the U.S. push too far.
Right. We're speaking with Wilbur Ross, Chairman, President, and CEO of Ross Acquisition Corp., also former U.S. Secretary of Commerce. Mr. Secretary, you mentioned the movement of chip production from Taiwan to the United States that's happening very slowly, and analysts don't know if it can ever happen completely. But you are known for your investments in industries that were once thought long gone, especially in the U.S., steel plants, textile mills. The president certainly wants to bring back that type of manufacturing to the United States and build it up here. I'm curious on your view about how national security concerns are changing that globally. Apart from semiconductors, how are you thinking about some of these other industries that the president is supporting?
Well, he's supporting all technology, and I think that's the right direction to go, because any future war is going to be fought in space and in cyber. So I think directionally, he could not be more correct than what he's doing. I also think that he's correct in fostering AI, because AI is what will produce more productivity and therefore more economic growth. Every big technological innovation has always had the longer term effect of adding jobs, but it redefines them. So we need to be sure that our educational system can keep up with the needs for an increasingly technical economy. And as long as it does, I think we'll be there. Now, why is that important? The way we won World War II and the way I believe Reagan won the Cold War was the Russian military and the Russian civilian economy could not keep up with him. And therefore, at the end of the day, a very, very key component of defense strategy is economic power.
We have to leave it there. Wilbur, we appreciate your time so much. Wilbur Ross, he's Chairman, President, and CEO of Ross Acquisition Corporation, of course, former U.S. Commerce Secretary during President Trump's first term. Right now, we want to head down to Washington, D.C. The annual gathering known as the Hill and Valley Forum, bringing together tech and policymakers, is underway, and that's where we find the co-hosts of B-Tech on Bloomberg TV, Caroline Hyde and Ed Ludlow. Caroline, I want to toss it over to you.
Thank you, because we are joined by the CTO of Applied Intuition. It is all about autonomous driving, the future of vehicles and transport and much more in the world of defense. We're pleased to welcome Peter Ludwig, who's of course the CTO of that business. And Peter, as a CTO, what does your technology do? Where are you taking us to?
Yeah, so we provide the infrastructure layer for physical AI. And so the complete software stack that enables machines to move, everything from cars to trucks to mining and construction equipment, and then drones and boats and defense.
And therefore, that's what's interesting, right? Is that we're at the intersection of Silicon Valley and government. We're at the intersection of, for you, defense and also commercial. How has that movement into the world of defense happened organically?
Somewhat. I mean, we're passionate about the field broadly, so certainly it was a deliberate choice on our part to enter the field. But there's so much commercial technology that we've developed that really translates so well into defense. Just some examples. We do work with the Navy, deploying the same kinds of data collection technology that we use for self-driving cars on Navy ships. And we do work broadly across the DoW on simulation testing. We call it the virtual proving ground, which is also directly taken out of our commercial business.
One of the themes of the Hill and Valley Forum, not necessarily just this year, over the number of years it's run, is how easy or not easy is it doing business with the military apparatus of this nation. And throughout the day, a number of founders have given examples where you see decisions made in days where previously it had been months. What's the experience been like for Applied in getting autonomous software stack integrated in various pieces of hardware that our military apparatus relies on?
Things are accelerating. There's no doubt about that. I think that in our own case, we've seen similar things where things maybe had stalled for even a year or so that are really being unblocked. There is a real desire, I think, by the whole apparatus to bring dual-use tech out to the warfighter more quickly.
Physical AI is hard for some people to understand. It is physical things, hardware in the real world, where your competence in software allows that bit of kit to move around a space and make autonomous decisions. What are some of the real world deployments that you can talk about? Because I think there's great skepticism that it has moved beyond robo-taxis and actually drone technology in the context of weapons.
Yeah, so certainly self-driving cars, that is the big first application, and so we have a ton of technology that's now on a bunch of companies all over the world.
Can you name them?
Our website, we work with 18 of the top 20 automakers. Everyone's using some part of our technology at this point, and we've been very deep in that domain actually almost for a decade now.
Right.
In the defense sector, though, there's a lot more focus on drones and drone technology, and so both the autonomous software that runs on drones and also thinking about the effects that you can have when you can swarm drones together.
From your perspective, the ethical dilemma for companies making the technology and then the use in the Pentagon, how is that something that you've been able to bridge as a company, as a leader of the company?
So we're a technology company, and so we focus on building the technology. We're not a political company, we're not a policy company, and I don't think that's actually our role to play. We want to make sure that we have the very best technology and that technology is available, and then I think through our ordinary political process and democracy, that's how we'll actually set those policies.
I always want to offer the opportunity when a company like yours comes to the show to explain what I call core competencies, what they're really good at. Kara and I, for quite a long time now, have been talking about Tesla being very good at autonomy, a vision-based approach where their software stack, they would say, is pretty good. NVIDIA is now wading into the physical AI space, not just with inference chips that are good at the edge, their own software, and libraries and catalogs of custom models. Well, why is it that yours are better than theirs?
So I wouldn't say that we're better or worse than theirs, right? We're acting as an infrastructure provider, and we work with the entire industry. And so our core competency is we've built really great infrastructure technology for physical AI, and we're really great at working with the actual manufacturers of these systems to get that integrated and deployed. We're really not just looking at the technology development, but also actually getting this deployed. And the hard part oftentimes is actually getting it into the real world and then solving all of those difficult problems that happen when you're really making use of those systems.
So it sounds as though you feel that there's a future of partnership, no matter what, with your technology. But how do you make sure...
Or the automakers are rubbish at software, which is a reasonable argument, right?
But why are you not going... The anxiety often is that eventually LLMs will come and eat all of the other professional applications. From your perspective, what makes NVIDIA not able to recreate what you've built?
Well, again, these are huge industries, right? If you think about just the automotive industry, it's like several percentage points of the global gross domestic product, and there are millions of people and employees in all of these industries, and so there's plenty of room, honestly, for many players, and I think no one company is going to dominate the entire industry. And NVIDIA plays an important role with chips, but there's many other layers to the technology stack and actually getting this technology deployed.
What I suppose the different domains have in common, robotaxi, in the physical AI space or robotics world, the use of bipedal humanoid robots in the industrial setting. This country is still waiting for sort of thorough federal level regulatory oversight, a list of rules. That's what we hear here at least. Where do you stand on that and the need for it?
I think for robotaxis, there is strong need for a federal policy. Right now it is very state by state, and that's absolutely impeding progress, for example, in long-haul trucking, where you actually have truck routes that would go between multiple states. And if you have to plan your trucking routes based on where the laws allow driverless trucking, that really limits the market potential. I think likewise in robotaxis, the legislation would be easier to follow if it were a national framework rather than state by state. And I think we'll see the same thing in humanoids. Humanoids industry is earlier, but it's advancing very quickly. And I actually hope that we can come up with a single framework for all of these physical AI systems.
Peter, it's a joy having you here, bathed in sunshine. I know that usually you're on the West Coast where Ed Helm's from, but Peter Ludwig is the CTO, Applied Intuition. Thank you for making time for us today, talking us through your technology stack. That was Peter. I'm going to pass it back to Carol and Tim in the studio.
All right, Caroline, thank you so much. Caroline Hyde and Ed Ludlow there with the co-founder and CTO of Applied Intuition. We do have some headlines crossing, though, when it comes to Iran here.
Yeah, the president speaking in the Oval Office after the swearing-in ceremony for Mark Wayne Mullen. He says we're in negotiations right now with Iranians. He says that Rubio, Vance, and other people are negotiating with Iran. Iran would like to make a deal, and they've agreed they'll never have a nuclear weapon. Let's go to the president now, who's taking questions.
They did, the people that they allowed from prisons all over the world. They came from the Congo, from all over South America. Rough people, really tough people. So, no, I understand what he means. He says, he would have liked to have captured more. I'm not capturing so much as removing. We're removing thousands of people. And many are self-deporting because we're going after them so powerfully that they're self-deporting, Tom, going back. I think that's one of the big unkept secrets. We have thousands and thousands of people, and they're self-deporting. They're going back to where they came from. But what we want really is the criminals. We're really focused on those criminals, getting them out. Yeah.
What's your message right now to Democrats and also to Americans that are stuck in airports? It's really devastating watching it online because Democrats won't fund DHS.
What's devastating?
Your message to Americans right now stuck in airports as we speak because Democrats won't fund
they
DHS?
just don't. They won't. Look. This is a deal that was done in the Great Big Beautiful Deal, which gave you the biggest tax cuts ever, including no tax on tips and no tax on Social Security for the seniors. Think of it, no tax on overtime, tax deductions when you buy a car. You take money, you pay interest on the money, you deduct it. We've never had that for people buying cars, if it's an American car, only if it's an American car. But they are just they stick together, the Democrats. I tell you, I give them great credit for that. We have some that they're not good stickers. We have guys like Tom Massey in Congress, who's terrible. He's just terrible person. I call him Rand Paul Jr. But they don't vote. Rand Paul, rarely votes for stuff. Likes me, says I'm a great president. He said the other day, I'm a great president, one of the greatest presidents. But I said, do me a favor, vote for us and don't call me a great. I'd rather have the vote than the statement. But we have people that don't stick together, and those people hopefully will someday be gone. The thing I most respect about the Democrats, even on horrible policy, they stick together. What they do have, though, is horrible policy. Transgender for everyone, open borders, men and women's sports. They have the worst policy that you can imagine. And so whether they stick together or not, they have just this terrible policy. We have great policy. Republicans have great policy. We have common sense policy, but it's great policy. That's our biggest advantage, is our policy is correct. Yeah, please.
Mr. President, are you encouraging our allies in the Gulf to be more involved in the Iran operation?
Say it.
Are you encouraging our allies in the Gulf to be more involved in the Iran operation?
Yeah, a little bit, but more NATO. I think our Gulf allies have been pretty good, to be honest with you. UAE's been hit so hard. He got hit by 1,400 rockets, shot them all out of the air with our great Patriot missiles. Think of it, they shot 100 missiles at one of our aircraft carriers, the Abraham Lincoln, one of the biggest ships in the world, actually. And out of 101 missiles shot, every single one of them was knocked down in the sea. Think of that. Think of what that means. 101 missiles, highly sophisticated, very fast missiles shot. Out of 101, all 101 were shot down and now, for the most part, lie at the bottom of the sea. Yeah, pretty amazing, right? Pretty amazing. Our military is amazing, Pete. You know the attack I'm talking about recently? 101 shot. I said, wow. I saw that. You can see we have sort of pretty good equipment that we see. It's called the red line. Those red lines were thick, right? I said, that's a lot. And then we saw them one by one just get shot. And these guys that do the shooting are the coolest cucumbers ever. You know, most people, you don't have a lot of time. When a missile's going at 2,500 miles an hour, I don't care how far away it is, you don't have a lot of time. But I watched them sit down and think. Great students, MITs, a lot of MITs, a lot of guys like this. They're not as much into the muscle as they are this one right here. And amazing to watch them perform under great pressure, because they have a matter of seconds to do it. If they don't do it properly, it's a big problem, you know, because these were very powerful missiles coming. And so a lot of people choke. They don't choke. These guys don't choke. They're the best in the world. We have the best in the world, yeah.
Mr. President, what would be your message today to the TSA agents who have been staying home in recent days amid this impasse?
Well, some of them are needing money, you know, because the Democrats cut off their money. I blame the Democrats more than anything else. But some of them, you know, they didn't get paid because they're not funded by the Democrats. This is a Democrat problem. In fact, I actually said to the Senate, why would you say this is a Democrat problem? I think the polls are showing it's a Democrat problem. And they'll do anything actually to hurt our country so they can try and win the midterms. And if we ever went back to our old policies, we wouldn't have a country left.
If they get a deal, Republicans and Democrats in the Senate, to fund all but enforcement operations of ICE, to get those TSA agents repaid and to open up the rest of the department, would you sign that?
Well, I don't want to comment until I see the deal, but as you know, they're negotiating a deal. I guess they're getting fairly close, but I think any deal they make, I'm pretty much not happy with it. These guys came in, they wouldn't pay people. You know, they had a deal to pay. They had to break their deal. The Democrats broke the deal that we had. It was all done. Everything was fine. And then they just said, well, we're not going to pay anymore. And they hurt our country. And at a very difficult time because, you know, we are at, as they would say, a war. They call it a war. I call it a military operation, a very successful one, like nobody's ever seen before. Hey, Venezuela was equally as successful. That was a great thing. No, the Democrats had a deal. It was a done deal. And then they said, well, we're not going to pay. And so a lot of people suffered over that and put our country in danger. You have another question? You haven't been here in a while.
Well, on Iran, can you give us any more sense of who exactly in Iran it is, either Witkoff and Kushner and others you're speaking with?
Yeah, we had, I hate to say this in front of these young people. They're not children. I spoke to most of them. They sound like adults to me, even though they are sort of children, right? They'll always be your children. But I hate to say it, but we killed all their leadership. And then they met to choose new leaders, and we killed all of them. And now we have a new group, and we can easily do that, but let's see how they turn out. We have really regime change. You know, this is a change in the regime because the leaders are all very different than the ones that we started off with that created all those problems. So this was, I think we can say, Jason, this is regime change, right?
What makes you trust them?
I don't trust anybody. I don't trust you. I mean, that's only because I know you. But if I didn't know you, I'd probably have more trust. But I don't trust anyone.
Why bother
Why do
talking
you?
to them
Why
then?
do you say that? Why do you say what makes you trust? Do you think I trust them? I don't trust them.
Then why bother talking to them?
Because they're going to make a deal. They're going to make a deal. They did something yesterday that was amazing, actually. They gave us a present, and the present arrived today. And it was a very big present worth a tremendous amount of money. And I'm not going to tell you what that present is, but it was a very significant prize. And they gave it to us, and they said they were going to give it. So that meant one thing to me: we're dealing with the right people.
Is that nuclear related?
No, it wasn't nuclear related. It was oil and gas related, and it was a very nice thing they did. But what it showed me is that we're dealing with the right people. Because, you don't know, because the leadership was killed, all gone. Khomeini, all gone, as the expression goes, the past supreme leader. And then the new supreme leader was racked up, at a minimum racked up pretty good, and everyone else was gone. And then many of the people in the third tier are gone. But we're dealing with a group of people that I think turn out, and the present, the gift they made to us was very significant. And they said they were going to do it, and it happened. And they're the only ones that could have done it. Jennifer?
Was it related to the Strait of Hormuz and the flow of...
Yeah, it was related to the flow and to the strait, yeah, it was.
Are you negotiating on who's going to control the strait from now on?
No, we'll have control of anything we want. Look, if we can end this without more lives being down, without knocking out $10 billion electric plants that are brand new and the apple of their eye, I'd like to be able to do that, But they can't have certain things. I mean, you know the things. I don't have to go over the list, but again, it starts with no nuclear weapons, and they've agreed to that. There won't be any nuclear weapons. They're not going to have, and they're not going to have enrichment, any of those things. But look, I hate to say that we're in a very good bargaining position, and I hate to say that they're defenseless because, until that last missile is fired, they have little power. But we are in about the best bargaining position. We're way ahead of schedule. And again, they have no Navy and they have no Air Force and they have no missile protection, and most of their missiles are gone. Most of their launches we've killed. We've killed about 82% of their launchers. So even if they had a missile, they can't launch it. We've been very fast. We have the greatest military in the world. Nobody even comes close. We have the best military equipment in the world. Go ahead.
On Saudi Arabia, there's been some reporting that you've been talking to the Crown Prince. Have you been focused on normalization between Saudi Arabia and Israel at this point?
No, we have a great relationship with Saudi Arabia. What do you hear with Saudi Arabia?
Just hearing that you've been talking and that he has been encouraging you to do certain things related to Iran. Can you share a little bit?
He's a warrior. He does, yeah. He's a warrior. He's fighting with us, by the way. Saudi Arabia has been excellent, and UAE, excellent. And I will tell you, Qatar, incredible. Qatar took a hit, a pretty bad hit. Qatar's very close, they're essentially, you can walk right over the border. Qatar took a hit. They've been great. They've been very strong. Kuwait, they had a little mishap. They shot down 3 planes with our missiles. They happened to be our planes, but the pilots made it. Can you imagine the pilots making it? The pilots saw what was coming, and they said, those are patriots. We're not going to escape patriots, and they got out of there pretty quick, Pete, right? Pretty amazing that they got out. The 3 pilots lived. They're fine. In fact, they're flying today.
Was the Kuwaitis that accidentally fired the missile?
Yeah, the Kuwaitis made a mistake. They fired. They thought they were firing at the enemy. It was, as the expression goes, friendly fire. But the pilots are great. They're flying today. Pretty amazing when you think of it. Yeah.
President Trump, on a human level, how hopeful are you that this peace deal will work out? Like as a human,
On what?
On a human level, not as the President of the United States. How hopeful are you that this peace deal will work out with Iran?
You're talking about to end it? Well, I think we're going to end it. I can't tell you for sure. I don't like to say this. We've won this. This war has been won. The only one that likes to keep it going is the fake news. I mean, the New York Times, you read the New York Times, it's like we're not winning a war where they have no Navy and they have no Air Force and they have no nothing. And we literally have planes flying over Tehran and other parts of their country, they can't do a thing about it. For instance, if I want to take down that power plant, that very big, powerful power plant, they can't do a thing about it. It's like, take me. That's all they can do. And yet, if you read the New York Times, or if you watch ABC fake news or NBC fake news, you'd say it's a close battle. It's not a close battle. They're totally defeated. You know, we killed their Navy in, would you say 3 days, Pete? Gone. In fact, I was a little upset with Pete. I said, why didn't you save the ships? We could have used them, right? He said, it's more fun shooting them down. But the Navy was wiped out in a very rapid order. Pretty impressive for you guys, you champion wrestlers, right? When you hear this stuff. But you don't, if you read the news, you don't hear this. You know, you read like, oh, they're doing wonderfully. They're doing terribly. They're wiped out militarily. They are dead. Yeah.
On Ukraine, is there a new sense of a timeline? Do you want to get something done before the midterms?
Well, we'd like to see President Putin and President Zelensky sit down and make a deal. I think they're getting close, but I've been saying that for a while. I've settled 8 wars. All of them should have been more difficult than this one. This should have been the easiest one. But these are two people that truly hate each other. You'll find out that hatred is not good for making deals. These are people that they don't like each other very much. Yeah.
I know you said there's a bunch of people from the administration who are negotiating with Iran. There's been reports that the vice president is leading those negotiations. Is that true?
Well, he's involved in them. JD is involved, and Marco's involved, and Jared Kushner's involved, very smart guy, and Steve Witkoff, smart guy, is involved, and I'm involved. Why? I'm going to be so big. Oh, I don't want to talk about it. I'm the president of the United States, Tom, and I'm not going to talk about it. It's beneath me to talk about saving millions of lives, because that's what you're talking about. You're talking about saving millions of lives. If Iran had a nuclear weapon, they would have used it. And if I didn't end the horrible Barack Hussein Obama Iran nuclear deal in my first administration, they would have had a nuclear weapon 3 or 4 years ago. They would have used it. I would have never gotten the chance probably to be president. Who knows what it would have been so devastating. And if we didn't send those beautiful B-2 bombers, they took them off my desk. They were right there. I don't know why. But if we didn't have those the B-2 hit, which was so we obliterated, despite CNN. CNN said, well, maybe the word obliteration. Said, no, we obliterated it. Just obliterated their nuclear potential. You would have had them having 2 weeks after that attack, had we not made the attack, they would have had a nuclear weapon. They would have absolutely used it. And they would have used it on the entire Middle East, including Israel. And you know why you see that? Because unexpectedly, when this war broke out, unexpectedly, they started sending missiles to UAE, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, Bahrain, and elsewhere. And nobody thought they were going to. Were you equally surprised by that, Pete?
Way more than we thought, Mr. President.
Pete, do you want to give about a 3-minute statement on how we're doing in this, as I call it, military operation? People don't like me using the word war, so I won't. But the Democrats call it a war. How about a little statement? I think he's done a very good job. Do we agree he's done a good job, Mark White? Can we take some of your time?
Well, thank you, Mr. President. You're spot on. Never in history has a modern military, Iran had a modern military, a modern navy, a modern air force, modern air defenses, leadership, massive bunker. Never has a modern military been so rapidly and historically obliterated, defeated from day one with overwhelming firepower. The air campaign that we've conducted, that Israel's conducted alongside us, was one for the history books, truly. And it's because we have a president of the United States that when he sends his warfighters out to fight, he unties their hands to actually go out and close with and destroy the enemy as viciously as possible from moment one. And that's why we see ourselves as part of this negotiation as well. We negotiate with bombs. You have a choice as we loiter over the top of Tehran, as the president talked about your future. The president has made it clear that you will not have a nuclear weapon. The War Department agrees. Our job is to ensure that. And so we're keeping our hand on that throttle. as long as hard as is necessary to ensure the interest of the United States of America are achieved on that battlefield. This is not Iraq and Afghanistan. This is not a president who's interested in vague end states. He's been very clear with us about what we need to accomplish, creating the conditions for them never to have a nuclear capability, and that's exactly what we're doing in historic fashion. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Thank you. Great job.
Mr. President,
You know, the only two people that were quite disappointed, I don't want to say this, but I have to. I said, Pete and General Raisin Kane, I think this thing's going to be settled very soon. Here they go. Oh, that's too bad. Pete didn't want it to be settled. It's these guys are doing a great job. That's a good attitude, though, Tom, right? They were not interested in settlement. They were interested in just winning this thing. Yeah, please.
Mr. President, can you, just taking things locally, hopefully not doing international affairs for a second, do you support the construction of the Second Avenue subway in New York City, and will your administration
Wow, that's really a far out question. You know, the Second Avenue subway is being under construction for, you're a young guy, is longer than you are old, okay?
All right. Well, the president's definitely speaking about something near and dear to we New Yorkers, anything to do with the New York City subway system. That is, of course, President Trump live there at the Oval Office. And I would say, first and foremost, some of what he said, that it sounds like they're getting close to maybe a deal, or at least there's talks going on. At least that's what he says. But I'm just saying, in terms of the markets, we're pretty much a kind of where we were when he started talking.
Yeah, the president said, we've won this war. It's not a close battle. Iran is defeated. Iran is a dead military. He said that J.D. Vance is involved. Secretary Marco Rubio is involved. He also said that he thinks that Putin and Zelensky are getting close to a deal. You mentioned that markets haven't moved much. We should note Brent and WTI are still up more than 3.4% today. WTI above 92, Brent still above $103 per barrel. So the market signal that we're getting is not necessarily one of quote unquote oil prices dropping like a rock when the war is over.
Right. And to be fair, I don't know that he actually said close to a deal, but he said that they are having success in Iran. We're talking to the right people in Iran. The people we're talking to in Iran want to make a deal. We'll see what happens. And I think, to be fair, we've heard some of this, I feel like, certainly over the last 24, 48 hours. At the same time, we've also had reports and different reporting on the possibility of more U.S. forces going to Iran, specifically whether it's the U.S. airborne groups or whether it's boots on the ground. So this is something we have to be very careful about. But again, that is the president. We'll continue to monitor and bring you any more headlines as they are known. In the meantime, we've got a market where we're down on the S&P, down on the NASDAQ 100. And as you said, Tim, we continue to see energy markets that are higher. So certainly top of mind when it comes to investors. Another story that's top of mind is anything and everything to do with private credit.
Let's get to the father and son team who rode private credit on the way up and who risk falling hard on the way down. It's an exclusive. It's Bloomberg's Big Take today. You can read the story and more from Bloomberg, The Big Take, on the Bloomberg terminal and at Bloomberg.com/Big Take.
Yeah, it's a great story. Two reporters among the team reporting it out. Bloomberg News Leveraged Finance reporter Ellen DiMauro and Olivia Fishlow. They are both here in studio. It is a great story as we continue to kind of track the concerns when it comes to private credit. And I want to start with you, Ellen. Talk to us about Cliffwater, who they are, what's been their approach, and why we're talking about them, why you guys did a deep dive.
Yeah, so Cliffwater is a sort of pioneer in private credit, really. They started out as a consultant to allocators like pension funds, and then they created their own asset management business, which has grown exponentially over the last 10 or so years. What they do is essentially partner with other direct lenders and take a slice of each of those loans. And that's allowed them to grow very quickly and become hyper diversified compared to other platforms that are just single manager.
It worked out for a while and it made the founders incredibly wealthy. Olivia, come on in here because then redemptions started. What can you tell us about why the redemption started and what investors wanted?
Yeah, definitely. So like Ellen's saying, the Cliffwater model is sort of a fund that allows investors to access private credit writ large.
So they're not actually doing loans. They are investing in other funds that are.
They're buying loans from other managers, so it's like a multi-lender model.
Okay.
So when stress started to come to private credit and investors started to want out, Cliffwater was a big place where now anyone worried about private credit that's invested in the fund maybe decided to pull capital, and that's why we saw record redemptions from the fund this quarter.
We have a great chart, and I want to bring it up. It's in the story, and Tim and I were like kind of blown away about some of the graphics that really help tell the story, because we talk about this kind of fund of funds approach, if you will. It's a circular chart, but what it basically is showing, and it's hard for those folks, obviously, if you're listening on radio, you can't see it, but difficult too on TV. But what it's basically showing is that they owned, about a third of Barings Private Credit Corp at the end of 2025, but they also were involved with Ares, right? Blackstone. I mean, walk us through that circle and what it tells us.
Sure. So the way that they've been able to partner with so many managers is by investing directly in the funds, and then they set up agreements to be able to be in the underlying loans as well. So they are invested in, I think, more than 50 direct lenders. They're invested in many. This is one chunk of sort of those types of fund investments. This is the non-traded BDCs and the investment partnerships and specifically, but they have a large holding in Barings, Ares, KKR, you name it, like all the big names. Blackstone. Kind
of a who's who, right?
It really is, yeah.
I think the question that a lot of people have, and we're going to be speaking about this a little later in our program to Olivia, is this question of to what extent are the challenges at Cliffwater or a single firm contained versus are they part of a bigger picture when it comes to private credit and this idea of so-called contagion? What did you find in your reporting?
So I think that we've seen recently that firms are expecting this concern among investors to continue. We saw some lenders that capped redemptions signal that they're going to do the same thing next quarter. So I think we've definitely seen any stress at one fund, managers are expecting it to kind of spill over to their fund as well.
That's what I was curious about. When the stories kind of pitch as one of the biggest question marks in the private credit industry, is it because they are so vulnerable, or that if they start to come undone, then you've got to assume that there is that contagion or systemic impact?
I think people were pointing to Cliffwater in particular because of this fund of private credit funds aspect that's very unique to them. And then also, I mean, they're just really big. It's
How big?
33 billion, which is quite large. I think they're second only to BCRED. So that's pretty large in this market. They're touching a lot of different direct lenders. They're in a lot of loans. Everybody's worried about software and AI disruption. They're in a lot of software. So there's a couple reasons people are focused on.
So is that why, Ellen, it didn't work? It worked until it didn't work. Was it software? What was sort of the straw that broke the camel's back with this?
I think a lot of this comes down to sentiment around software, personally. Yeah. We saw people start to get nervous, and we've reported previously that software is the single largest sector exposure in private credit. It's about 20%, which is sizable. So we're starting to see people get their money out or try to, and we're starting to see gating happen. So a lot of this stems from that.
I will point out, Carol, software companies taking a hit today. The latest example of volatility in the sector, the information reporting that Amazon Web Services is developing AI tools designed to automate functions in sales and biz dev.
Yeah, like we continue to see this on a daily basis, kind of questioning some of the existing models or companies and whether or not, we're going to see more problems going forward. I guess time will tell. Olivia, I want to bring you back in because you've got another story in the Bloomberg that's about Ares Management and Apollo Global capping private credit fund withdrawals as clients want to redeem more. We kind of remind everybody, private credit, not so liquid, folks. You're going to have to park your money for a while, but that's not, so, investors are pushing back. So tell us a little bit more about this.
Right. Yeah. So I think, like we're saying, there's all these fears around private credit, around software, right? But I think a big issue for these lenders is that they went really aggressive into the retail space, and that helped grow their firms a lot. It let them bring in a lot of money, but maybe they weren't prepared for that retail space to sort of turn. And now we're sort of dealing with the first wave of all of these funds having to cap redemptions.
Who's at fault, though? Like when you think about that, and we've had folks on around this table who said, read the fine print. And sometimes that fine print is pretty early in.
Yeah, James Crombie talks about that all the time. Your colleague on the team. He says this is like literally what it says in the prospectuses. So, read the fine print here.
I think that is true, but what is hard is that we've seen some lenders actually decide not to cap redemptions, and they took special measures to return all of investors' capital. So it sort of set this not uniform pace where maybe some investors felt like, wait, I thought I could get all my money back.
Yeah, I mean, okay, so what are we watching? Let's go back to Cliffwater. So what do we need to watch? What are you guys watching that is an indication that, all right, this storm, it's not just a short storm, it's something much bigger?
Yeah, I think we're going to continue to watch for redemptions. You know, if they stay elevated, we're going to watch Cliffwater's liquidity levels. We reported that they'll be able to manage this, like max redemptions, for at least a year without having to sell any assets or sell any fund stakes or anything like that, any extreme measures. So we'll be waiting to see if they can maintain that liquidity, and maybe investors will get more comfortable again and stop redeeming. Maybe they won't.
Right.
Time will tell.
And I also think about the rate environment, whether we start to see rates go up. We know that higher rates have been problematic for all of the private credit world. Thank you guys so much. Important story, among the most read on the Bloomberg terminal. Bloomberg News Leveraged Finance reporter Ellen DiMauro and Olivia Fishlow. You can read their story and more from the Bloomberg Big Take. It's on the Bloomberg and at Bloomberg.com/Big Take. That's going to do it for us.